Welcome to today's Explainer. We are jumping right in today to unpack one of the most absolutely incredible, yet kind of untold, stories of sheer survival in human history. We're looking at exactly how the Indian subcontinent, known historically as Hindustan, actually managed to withstand the most feared, ruthless, and rapidly expanding military machine the world had ever seen. I'm talking, of course, about the Mongol Empire.
Okay, let's dive into this massive historical paradox. Genghis Khan started out as an orphan child in a small, remote region, right? Yet he went on to utterly crush major global superpowers, taking control of a vast portion of the earth. But there was this one massive region that neither he nor his successors could ever seem to pull into their group. So why couldn't this totally unstoppable force conquer India?
Well, to understand the sheer gravity of this, we really have to look at the terrifying reality of the Mongols. After Genghis Khan passed, his sons took the reins. And in just 50 short years, which is a blink of an eye in history, this empire exploded from a tiny patch in Mongolia to stretch all the way to the borders of Egypt on one side and the oceans of Japan on the other. For the people of Hindustan, it was literally like living with a hungry man-eating lion pacing right outside your front door. The Mongols were expanding at breakneck speed, and their eyes were fixed firmly on the wealth of Hindustan.
Section 1. The Unconquered Hindustan.
So, the geographic layout of this massive region made defending it possible, but it was also highly dangerous. Hindustan was effectively walled off on three sides, almost like a giant natural fortress. Up north, you've got impassable Himalayan snow. Down south, the vast Indian Ocean. Throw in an impassable desert, and there was essentially only one viable land route for an invading army to strike. They called it the Gateway to India, located in modern-day Pakistan. But this meant that the entire existential defense of a whole subcontinent had to happen at this one single geographic choke point.
Section 2. Balban's Iron Defense.
Around this time, a former slave actually rose up to become the Sultan. His name was Balban, and because he had personally been enslaved by the Mongols previously, he knew firsthand that the old tactics just weren't going to cut it anymore. Now, what's really interesting about this is the total shift in military strategy. In the old system, kings basically had to beg regional governors to borrow temporary militias whenever they needed them. Balban realized that kind of slow, decentralized approach was a literal death sentence. Instead, he engineered a highly trained, permanent standing army that took orders directly from him. It was a completely revolutionary shift for their survival.
But look, just having a standing army wasn't enough. They needed a bulletproof system. So Balban engineered this multi-layered defense plan right at that gateway to India. First up, he rebuilt and heavily fortified massive forts all along that northern route. Second, he stationed his absolute best, most elite troops in these forts, headquartered out of the city of Multan. And to ensure morale stayed sky high, he put his eldest son, Prince Muhammad, directly in command. Finally, because he was still completely terrified of the Mongol war machine, he created a secondary, 24/7 active backup defense line commanded by his second son. Basically, if the Mongols somehow broke that first line, the second would be right there waiting. He turned the border into an absolute fortress.
And this iron defense was really put to the test when a massive Mongol army finally attacked at full speed. Prince Muhammad fought with such incredible, fierce bravery that the formidable Mongol forces were actually forced to retreat. The strategy totally worked. Hindustan was safe, but the human cost was just tragic. Exhausted from this massive victory, the prince took a small group of soldiers to rest by a nearby river. Out of nowhere, remaining Mongol forces ambushed them from the jungle. Despite fighting fiercely, Prince Muhammad was struck by an arrow and killed. When the aging Sultan Balban heard the news of his beloved son's death, the shock completely destroyed his health. He died of sheer grief exactly 2 years later.
Let's move to Section 3 and see how this builds. Khalji and the Siege.
Following Balban, a brilliant and extremely determined new ruler took control, Alauddin Khalji. The Mongols were obviously still an existential threat, so Khalji took Balban's standing army idea and scaled it up to unprecedented heights. He assembled the largest standing army in Indian history up to that point. But, as we know, huge armies need huge resources. Khalji recognized that defeating the Mongols wasn't just about swords, it was about totally restructuring the state's economy to support total war. And it worked. His generals started launching these aggressive preemptive cavalry strikes that actually forced the Mongols back into retreat.
So, feeling pretty confident after this victory, Khalji decided to go after a lifelong dream, expanding his control down into South India. He took his massive army and laid siege to a really formidable southern fort, but it turned out to be far tougher than he ever expected. 1 month passed, then 2, then 3. His advisors were practically begging him to return to Delhi, warning him over and over that the Mongols were still a massive threat. But Khalji was incredibly stubborn. He planted his camps and absolutely refused to leave. It took 7 relentless, grueling months away from his capital before the fort finally fell. And in a tragic end to the siege, the women of the fort committed jauhar, jumping into a massive fire to avoid capture.
Now, it's really important we take a second to clear up a massive historical myth surrounding this 7-month siege. About 200 years after these brutal events took place, a Sufi poet wrote a highly romanticized poem claiming Khalji wasn't actually fighting for military conquest, but rather for the love of a beautiful local queen named Padmavati. But the historical sources tell a totally different story. For 2 full centuries following the siege, not a single historian documented this romance. It's a prime example of how the brutal, cold realities of military sieges can be transformed into completely fictionalized poetic myths centuries later.
Anyway, while Khalji was busy celebrating the hard-won capture of the fort, his absolute worst nightmare came true. He received terrifying news. A massive Mongol army was speeding straight toward his capital, Delhi. His celebration instantly turned to sheer panic. Leaving everything behind, he led his army on a desperate sprint back north. He somehow managed to arrive just right before the Mongols, but his army was completely, utterly exhausted. Heavy rains along the way had ruined their weapons and tired out their horses. Even worse, the Mongols had already blocked all the roads to Delhi, meaning regional governors couldn't send any reinforcements to help Khalji at all. He was trapped.
And this brilliantly illustrates how, when brute strength fails, tactical positioning can totally save you. Knowing his exhausted army couldn't possibly fight head-on, Khalji moved his forces into a specific fortress just outside Delhi. Now, this fortress was naturally bordered by a river on 3 of its sides. For the single remaining land entrance, he ordered his men to dig a massive, impassable trench. The Mongols arrived and besieged the fortress for 2 whole months. They launched fierce attacks, but they simply could not breach that trench warfare setup. Frustrated, they looted the massive economic stores Khalji had built up, caused widespread havoc, and then abruptly left because a rebellion had actually broken out back in their own homeland. Hindustan was saved again, literally by the skin of its teeth.
Section 4. The ultimate brutal message.
A few years later, the Mongols returned, but this time was different. They didn't just come to raid, they brought their families to conquer and settle permanently. After a desperately difficult battle, Khalji's forces somehow managed to defeat them again. But Khalji decided he needed to send a message so horrifying that the Mongols would never even look at Hindustan again. So, the crucial point is this staggering number right here. Historical sources note around 100,000 Mongols were killed. Captives were crushed under elephants, and they built massive towers out of their skulls, while the surviving families were sold into slavery.
Looking impartially at the results of this gruesome psychological warfare, the message was sent loudly and clearly. If you try to conquer Hindustan, this is your absolute fate. And remarkably, it actually worked. The Mongol Empire was so utterly terrified by this brutal display that they didn't launch another major attack for an entire century.
Section 5. The final irony.
But history is rarely a straight line, is it? Let's fast forward a bit. Following Khalji's brutal warning, Hindustan actually enjoyed 100 years of peace. But exactly a century later, a cunning new leader emerged, Amir Timur. Though not of Genghis Khan's direct bloodline, he seized the Mongol Empire and launched a devastating attack, reportedly beheading 100,000 people at Delhi in a single night. Then, jump exactly 100 years after that, and Timur's descendant Babur returned. Babur finally did what generations of his predecessors couldn't. He conquered Hindustan, establishing the mighty Mughal Empire, which ironically went on to turn the region into a global economic superpower.
I mean, it's just an incredible historical irony. The very people that Balban and Khalji spent their entire lives, their blood and their economies trying to keep out, eventually became the exact rulers who built Hindustan into an unprecedented global superpower. Which leaves us with a really fascinating question to ponder. After centuries of brilliant, ironclad defense, is the fall of an empire simply inevitable? Does history just operate in an unavoidable cycle where today's greatest enemy becomes tomorrow's foundation? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning the past, and I'll see you next time.